a short while. As you know, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was a key figure in the anti-apartheid movement. He was an advocate for peace and equality and helped lead the country in the transition from apartheid to democracy. He was known as a voice of the voiceless and encouraged reconciliation between various warring factions. Today, he leaves a legacy that South Africans, I guess, will celebrate. His life, his work. Let's bring in Mmusi Maimane. Mr. Maimane is one South African movement leader. He joins us now live. Sir, thank you very much indeed for your time. What would you say was your fondest memories of Mr. Tutu?
Well, good morning, and good morning to fellow South Africans. There have been so many. Every single time I interacted with the Arch, I found him magnanimous, I found him gracious. And perhaps one of my fondest memories was we'd gone to visit his house, and he was quite old and frail at the time. And I can remember thinking to myself, as they came, because he lived a very modest life, they were delivering tons and tons of firewood. And here he was, even with his walking stick, wanting to help with the firewood, to offload it off the truck. And I was struck by, here is this figure, this incredible individual, being willing to stoop down to do the most menial of tasks. And how he interacted in that, even with Mama Leah, was such a genuine reminder of what family is, and ultimately, the magnitude of being able to see greatness in others and humanity in others as a principle of Ubuntu is one of the things that you realize that as you meet leaders all over the world, Archbishop Tutu had an unbelievable sense of humility, an incredible sense of humor, and ultimately, always being willing to give insight and actually impart something to the next generation. I owe a great deal of gratitude to a life well lived, and certainly his inspiration in my life in reminding us that reconciliation, love, triumphs over hatred and revenge.
No doubt, Mr. Maimane, he was a unique being. His connection to the spiritual aspect of life, as well as being conscious of his role as a social justice activist, made him unique. Not a politician, but offering advice and direction to those who play in that space, not afraid to give a good tongue lashing now and then. To what extent did Desmond Tutu influence politics and political leaders in South Africa, do you think?
I think, every society is built around a set of values. If the values of that society become disturbed, then it is those who are the custodians of values to be able to speak out. And one of the values that is missing in South Africa is the value of Ubuntu, or a sense of humanity. The value of the fact that people cannot be looting public service or public funds without accountability, that racism and oppression are evil. And Archbishop Tutu was never shy to be the moral conscience of the nation and a voice. I think those who ought to be relieved, in some ways, sadly, that no one ever ought to be relieved at the passing of another individual, but are those who want to continue to steal from the people. Because Archbishop Tutu would have never spared words against those people, and still didn't. He would be forthright at being able to say that what you are doing is criminal, and you ought to be ashamed of yourself. As his words were, he even spoke against the apartheid government. He spoke against this current government on the back of the fact that when there's crass materialism and crass looting, you realize that the moral conscience of the nation in Archbishop Tutu would be the first to prick at the conscience of those who were committed to committing atrocities against our people. And therefore, I think, to me, the saddest bit about his passing is the fact that we find ourselves in a time where we could use his voice. We're in the middle of a Shell investigation or a court case out in Saldanha, where the climate activist Archbishop Tutu would have been speaking out. We are in the middle of a Zondo commission, where a report is about to table, where the moral conscience of Archbishop Tutu was needed. And so we don't mourn as those who simply have long forgotten. We mourn for our nation in that someone who was such a powerful voice is gone. But also, the best way to pay gratitude to a life well lived is to stand up for those values, to speak out against injustice, and be able to say, who are the ones who are left out, who are seen as less, and let's fight for them. That in the midst of gender-based violence, we must be the first ones to stand up in the spirit of Archbishop Tutu to say, we will speak for those who are on the outside, the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the poor.
And as a leader, be it political, be it religious, you don't want to play with legitimate pain, isn't it? You don't want to play with legitimate fear, legitimate frustration. You want to speak to it and have a counter message that makes people feel included and empowered. How did Mr. Tutu use his voice to do just that?
I think the first thing you've got to do as a leader, you know, I keep speaking about this principle of Ubuntu because one of my memories of Archbishop Tutu is that he spoke a lot about this principle when I, as a young activist, first met him. And that principle says you ought to see the humanity in others. I am because of you. So when you're dealing with issues of racism, you don't just deal with them at condemning racism, but you deal with them at saying, what is in this person that I need to see to invite them to be a better human being? Archbishop Tutu was able to see in everybody, from a faith point of view, the divine. And yes, there have been some evil people in this world, but Archbishop Tutu was able to even speak truth and love to them. We are not going to triumph by being one versus another, black versus white. We are going to triumph as a society when we realize that we ought to build this one South Africa. We're going to triumph when even those who benefited from apartheid become advocates of justice, recognizing the fact that what was committed under apartheid and benefited a few was a gross injustice. And therefore, they need to be at the forefront of the fight against it, as did people like Bears Naudé and Helen Suzman and so many others. That in fact, even those who are marginalized cannot in many ways saying we're seeking to settle scores against those who benefited, but rather let's work together to build a system that can benefit all of us. Yeah. And so Archbishop Tutu reminds us of that because it is a choice in South Africa. It is a choice whether you seek to fight the person or you fight the system. And I think those who are integrous to the struggle of this country will realize that it was never a war against a person. It was a war against a system that marginalized people, perpetuated by a bunch of individuals that needed to be dismantled so that we build a prosperous country. And so as a person of faith myself, I draw inspiration from Archbishop Tutu that revenge only begets revenge. Yeah. But that ultimately, if we truly, genuinely want to build a prosperous nation, we need to see the divine in others and build with others and invite others to the greatness that sits innate within them.
There, but for the grace, isn't it? He lived by that. He also spoke about current issues. And you spoke about a system. We have a democratic system, elections in South Africa. He encouraged people to think when making that cross and remember that it is going to decide what quality of life you are going to have for the next 5 years. To my knowledge, he wasn't a card-carrying member of any political party, but to what extent did he hold sway over the electorate?
No, undeniably. You know, we had many election campaigns, and I know many people sought to get his endorsement. I think he endorsed values. He continuously asked people, are you going to vote for leaders that are ethical? Are you going to vote for leaders who are non-racial, who are committed to building this rainbow nation? And are you going to vote for justice? And so I think what he was able to do was, without pointing people to a particular political party, he was able to point people to say, seek out ethical leadership. And for me, he asked of us, I remember even in our interactions, he asked for us to be better than what we were. He asked for us I'll never forget. We went to the Tutu Legacy Foundation and I sat with him and he was speaking about this the type of leaders you want to produce. And he was speaking about the fact that we need to be raising up a global sense, an ethical sense, and to be able to dismantle what is this corrupt system that we've engaged ourselves in. And so I think in his political role, he always pointed society towards values. And I think it was true in that he wanted to remain, in a sense, that voice of independence, that voice that could say to the apartheid government, this is evil, and a voice that could say to a democratically elected government that when corruption occurs, it is corrupt, and therefore leaders must rise up to the occasion. And as I say, to me, we wouldn't be working on building one South Africa had it not been for the life of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, because he taught us that it is possible. I'm a family person because Archbishop Tutu, in a family such as ours that is mixed race, because Archbishop Tutu said it's not black versus white, it is building color, it is that rainbow nation. So he asked us a lot of confronting questions that invited us to be better than what we were as leaders.
No, definitely a lot of people are grieving the loss of a great leader. But I guess grief doesn't mean that we get over it and move on. It means that we move forward in a way that honors the dead. And maybe that's a lesson for all of us to learn here in South Africa. Mmusi Maimane, we thank you very much indeed for your time, your thoughts. Be well.
Much appreciated, and wish all South Africans a peaceful time in this period. And obviously my deep condolences to the family of Tutu.
Leader of One South Africa movement, Mmusi Maimane, they're talking about his fondest memories of Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu and what he meant to us as a nation. The body of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu is lying at St. George's Cathedral to give mourners more time to pay personal tributes today and tomorrow.